I think we can take this conversation live. So Raphael, I think we'll just pick the conversation from where we picked it, where we left with the video, if you're ready. So basically the question I was asking him is to just remind us of the few statistics that he shared last time, especially regarding construction and the value of property vis-a-vis the cost of land. So you can share some of those important statistics that you gave us.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Rose. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah, so we talked about some statistics. I think there are quite a number of statistics, but one of the key statistics we talked about, actually two key statistics we talked about were really to do with what would consider the value of land, especially if you're doing this commercially, if you're developing commercially, and for a good return, the value of land if it goes beyond 20% of the total development budget, and the total development budget, if you remember, I talked about land, you add professional fees, you add the construction fees or other costs, and then you also add all the other statutory costs, contingencies, and all that. That constitutes what we'd call the total development budget. So value of land, if it goes beyond 20%, especially in our setup, you definitely struggle as a developer. Now, for homes, sometimes because of just the nature of homes, you might find that you bought a plot in Karen which has cost you 60 million shillings, and you perhaps even spent another 60 million shillings to do your house. So that might not be such a key metric, especially if you're building your home. But if you're looking at really building many homes or apartments, that's a very key metric. The other metrics that we talked about, especially for you, if you're buying an apartment, I said you can actually try and figure out whether a development is, or a developer is actually making what we'd call abnormal, supernormal profits. Ideally, normal developer profits are in the range of 30%. Anything beyond that, many times they're actually making a supernormal profit. And those are some of the key metrics that you need to look at, especially if you can estimate that what you estimate to be the total development budget. You need to estimate the construction costs based on a percentage basis or per square meter basis. And then you add the cost of land, and you can add that 30% profit margin to see whether, if you're buying a house, for example, in Kilimani or on Mombasa Road, you are not paying so much for that particular house. So those were the two, some of the statistics that we looked at last time.
Yeah, thank you. And I think for me, the one that I found quite interesting is that all over the world, a home does not give you good returns as you'd expect. And well, I knew that fact, I didn't know why. But what I have come to know is that homes are designed differently than rental properties for rent, because when you design a property for rent, it has to appeal to many people, but homes tend to be very, very subjective. So you'll find very few people who will also want to buy a home that was customized to your own ideas. So in that case, they don't fetch as much. So it's important that as we go into this major decision where some people usually say, I'll buy a home, but later I can sell it, then you need to look at it more of an asset, not necessarily as an investment. So today, as we focus now on the build, what would you consider to be the main advantages of building over buying? I mean, top of mind. What are those things when I build, I will be better off than somebody who buys a property, a home?
Yeah, at the very outset, really, I would say you're able to customize your home the way you want it and the way you like it. When you're buying something that's already built, many times you actually get into that space or the spaces, and you are like, I would have wanted the living room perhaps slightly larger, I would have wanted the kitchen done differently, but you live with that because you're buying, and perhaps it just meets your budget. So you're able to customize your house the way you want it. The other factor that you realize plays a big role is really that with the same amount of money, and in this case, let's use 10 million shillings. If you have 10 million disposable cash, 10 million that you want to put in a house, if you building your own house, you probably get a much larger space than you would if you are buying. In some instances, especially in this market, what we've seen is in the range of, give or take, 50 to 70% more. So if your 10 million could have afforded 200 square meters, you perhaps able to build 160, 170, 180 square meters with the same budget. So those are the key advantages that you look at, customization, and then definitely that you're able to get much more space with the same budget. Rose, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. On the flip side, so what would be the biggest disadvantage when you build versus when you buy?
You remember there are those 4 items that we talked about. Largely, when you are building, you first have to consider definitely the location that you're building at. To consider the other factor that we talk about, which is the amenities that are within that environment and the community around you. So those very key factors. So you might, yes, find that where you're building and where you can afford to build is a place where there are no amenities, there are no schools around, there are no hospitals around, perhaps. Even accessing that, the part of development that we had talked about really is not there. You cannot foresee that. You can't see for the next 5, 10 years, you can't see probably the government doing roads there, electricity. So these become very key factors and actually disadvantages for you considering to build if you don't get those right. If there is no community, if the location is not right, that means, of course, the other factors that come into play with location are not there. And then the amenities themselves are not available. So this will most likely then precipitate you or take you towards the buy direction rather than the build. But if you have a good location, you've a good community around you, some amenities around you, all other factors held constant, and you might actually consider building, because then you're able to get something that you love and that you like, to your own taste, really.
This is going back to the same conversation we had last time, where we said we are not restricted to just buy or build. For some, renting will be an option, and probably for a significant part of your career, even as you prepare to build. So if you need the amenities, you have young children who need to go to good schools, and where you can afford to build, you probably will consider renting for a season, and then you'll be able to build. So from your perspective as a development expert, as an architect, what does it take to build a home?
Okay, that's a good question. The very first thing really is that you have to have a site. So the location, where are you building this house or this home? So you have to have that site, and you are happy with it. Then after that, now you have to go to the next stage, which is figuring, and I always tell people to figure this first. You have to figure out to a budget, even before you move to the next stage. How much money do you have to spend? So the budget component is very important. So you have 5 million shillings or you have 10 million shillings. That's a figure, the operative figure that you'll be working with. But that factor then that is very key is the consultants, because those are the people that will be consulting next as you consider putting this, the house, you putting up the house. So the architect to play a very big role in this conversation. You'll probably be the first consultant you talk to, and at the outset, the architect always wants to know the budget, because that will determine the sort of house that I can give you in terms of sizing, in terms of specifications, in quality, in materials and such. So it is all determined by the budget. But in that conversation, you might choose to forego things like top-notch finishes in the initial stages, and get a slightly larger space and then you do the finishes much later. But it is important as you do this, as you discuss about the budget, the architect is very clear in his mind about your expectations, about your vision, and about the budget that you have and where you want to go, because that will determine whether you actually be able to put up that house and complete it, rather than leaving it as a white elephant, or you struggle to finish it and you probably finishing it 5-10 years down the road when you could have done it right at the outset. So it's important. So those key factors, so it's really talking about the site, talking about the budget, talking about the consultants, and then the consultants, of course, they come, we bring in the QS, the engineers who come in there, sometimes we bring in the landscape architects, interior designers. All these really form that consultant team, and the consultant team should be able to hold you right from the stage where the design is starting, you are discussing your brief and the vision, to the point when you actually occupying this property. They should be able to help you even actually unload most of the load from your back, and hold you right from getting approvals, buying materials, all that. They should be able actually to walk the journey with you.
Interesting. I want us to tackle each of these a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit about the budget. So in most cases, I will come with a budget. I have this number of millions that I want to do it, but is there roughly a formula that you can share, maybe for a basic finishing house? Because I believe the cost of finishing seems to be the one that skews the budget. So is there, and again, we go to an average house like we discussed in the last webinar. I think you had talked of a house around 150, 180 square meters. I can't remember the exact figure. So if I just want to put up the structure and do the basic finishing, is there a formula that I can work with? Like I say, for every square meter or for every square foot, how much is it?
Yeah, we actually use rules of thumb in this case, but it also depends on what type of a house you're putting up. If it's a bungalow, it's a simple bungalow, it will definitely cost you cheaper than if you're building a maisonette. So the rules of thumb, number one, we use per square meter basis. And what we've seen, especially in Nairobi, and I'm talking about current environment now, because this year costs have gone up by about 20%, and they are still increasing in as much as there are some stabilization in some prices, but costs this year alone have gone up by about 20%. So we're seeing where you building using a contractor, and let me speak from that perspective, and then also speak from the perspective where you are building on your own. So you're working to buy your own materials and all that. If you're working with a contractor, the prices that we're seeing with the BQs we're receiving currently are anything between 50,000 and 55,000 per square meter. So if you are building 100 square meters, a house of 100 square meters, you can do very quick tabulations, 5 to 5.5 million shillings. But that's a small house. That's really a 3-bedroom house. You can fit it within that, but it's a small house. Now, if you're building that same house on your own, you take off that developers or the contractors margin of about 30%. Contractors will price BQs with a margin of between 20 and 30%, and that's their profit margin. So you can, if you really deciding, okay, I'll be in charge of buying my own materials, running around, talking to people, talking to hardwares and all that, you can roughly take off 20% out of that, and you can see you can do that same house at around 40,000 shillings per square meter. So using that, really those rules of thumb, you're able to very quickly estimate if you're going for a 200 square meter house, it will cost you up to 8 million shillings. If you actually buying your own materials, doing your own supervision, or as it were, with your architects and your team. But those roughly are the figures that we're talking about. Bungalows definitely will be slightly cheaper. At bungalows, let me not say it's just slightly cheaper. About, if you at 40,000, it will be about 35 or thereabouts. It's not significantly cheaper because bungalows, it's really the same. It's a space, the same space perhaps that 200 square meters spread on real horizontally rather than vertically. So it's not necessarily that you save a lot of money, right? And doing a bungalow.
Okay, so the other difference now that comes in becomes the fittings and the furnishings that we apply. Now those ones can go all the way out, depends on what you want. And while at that, I have noticed that I don't know if why we find quite a number of people importing those things. The furniture, the fittings, is it that they are cheaper out there, or is it that it's the quality, maybe a specific quality or design somebody is looking at?
Actually, it's the two things we've spoken about. So it's an issue of cost. We've seen if you can manage, you can fill a container perhaps from China, and you ship in that container, you can save some. In some instances, we've seen actually savings of up to 50% relative to local costs. But it means you actually know where you're sourcing these materials and the quality you are sourcing. So what we've seen, especially if you're really doing your home and the fittings and the finishes are significant, is that you fly out with, say, your architect to China and you visit a number of factories. So you check on, in terms of the quality, in terms of the finishes, you have actually the interior design drawings with you, so that you can counter check. You check against that, it's a checklist. And you can visit factories, so you check the quality and you actually also check the cost. And you have to have an agent then that will pick all those items and probably just put them together and ship them. So we're seeing that a lot, but there are also some shipping agents who've come in Nairobi who are helping people to do this. And are able to really help you through the whole process. But it's a matter of cost and a matter of quality, because you might, for the same costs that you might have spent locally, you might get slightly superior finishes out there.
So thank you about that. So the other thing about budget, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier, is the whole issue of white elephants. And this is something that we see, and especially with retirees, those who probably waited too long to own a home, they probably could not do it. And so when they receive their lump sum, they decide, okay, one of the things that I need to do is to build a home. But as they start building this home, the home keeps on growing. And while initially they had enough money, they probably had done the right maths that I need about 3.5 million to build this home. Then they decide to add another room. They decide to do something else other than not finishing that that property. What other challenges does those adjustments bring to construction?
Exactly. So we find, number one, as we indicated, is really the budget gets impacted. Any change that you do, I always say any change that you undertake while the construction is ongoing, rather than on paper, when you're planning, will have an impact on your budget. And some of this you might not realize, but a movement even in a wall means that the structural system might need to be changed. The engineers might have to think of really reinforcing some other sections, and that might end up costing you quite a bit. Adding rooms, definitely you're adding more space. That again comes with all the manner of changes. But we also see you end up sometimes also getting very odd spaces, or spaces that are not functional, whereas they were planned very well to be seamless, to move from one space to the other. Just those minor changes that you do, you've introduced, especially during construction, you end up finding either unusable space or spaces that are just too large, and you even actually wondering later on, why did I need to do this? Something else that I needed to talk about here is, because those changes might come, some of these minor changes you might actually want to increase a certain, it might be a bathroom that you've said, okay, I needed to, rather than buying a single wash and basin, I need double. So a minor increment there. I always tell people to factor in a margin of safety in their budgets and do not discuss about that. So if I go to the architect and I'm telling the architect my budget is 10 million shillings, at the back of my mind, I need to have a margin of safety. So anything between 10 and 20% is a good figure. not the 5% contingency that we'll give you in the BQs. Always put some aside, that 10 up to about 20%, cash aside, because anything can happen. You might need those adjustments done, and you find you don't have the money. But if you had set that aside at the outset, even when you're giving the budget and you knew I have an extra million or 2 million shillings, then it can absorb those minor amendments that need to come in during construction.
Cost overruns, basically that's what you're telling us. So like we normally say in personal finance, always prepare for the unexpected, because the unexpected always happens. You probably will have no idea what it will be, but the nature of life is that there are always surprises that come. So to ensure that you're able to complete your project, then ensure that you have some margin. That's a principle of managing finances. And talking of some of those cost overruns, I think some of them come because of the building site. Now we go to the building site. There's a friend of mine who bought a piece of land somewhere, and there were other houses that had been developed, maybe not the immediate neighboring plots, but when one of the immediate next plot was developed, what they realized is that the soil condition was such that they need to do a lot of excavation. How can a lay person like me who does not understand those levels prepare for such things? How would I make sure that I am not building another floor that I had not planned for, like in some cases?
Okay. Yeah, and you see this quite often. We actually see this quite often. I know a friend of mine was building in Roiro, and typically Roiro is actually what we call a red soil area. But there are particular sections within Roiro that have black cotton soils, and they can be particularly bad. So you might end up finding black cotton soils going to 3-4 meters deep. And if you bought a plot in Roiro, some sections, Muguda and such, and you not realize that you are sitting on black cotton soils, it can cost you an arm and a leg, because you need to either build a basement, or if not a basement, you will need to excavate a lot and then you backfill all that space, and it's very, very expensive. So Nairobi, typically what you see, the greater Nairobi metropolitan area, is that we largely see the 3 types of soils. So we have the red soils, especially on the upper zones, so running through Kiambu, Limuru zones, and part of Karen, Ruda, those zones, and part of Roiro, really. Those zones are more red soils. As you go down towards Bakasi, towards now Syokimau, Kitengela, you're talking largely of black cotton soils, and then some areas of Rongai and such. You start getting some areas with Maram, and Maram is interspersed across. Now, it is important when you're buying a parcel of land, you have to be very clear, number one, of those soil conditions or the type of soil that you have. So it's always good to work with an architect or an engineer who can help you just determining those soils, because they can mean you either break up the bank or you actually abandon the project. The other thing you need to look at is the topography of the site. Topography is very key again, because given where the site, how the site perhaps is laid and how it drains, it might mean costly interventions to deal even with issues like drainage and dealing with soil conditions, what we call civil works for buildings. It's very unpredictable. It's not like a structure where the QS will actually tell you this structure will cost this much, and within 5% tolerances you'll be right. Civil works, just as it happens even with the roads, you can never be too sure. They are costly, and you only determine the actual cost after doing the work. So it's quite an expensive affair. So we look at the soil conditions, we look at the topography. You definitely, in some areas, you also need to look at how the sun impacts your site, and even the direction of the wind. So those are factors that when, as an architect, I'm actually looking at your site, I'll be considering. And if I'm helping you probably determine one site vis-a-vis another, which one to settle for, there are those factors that we can look at and just help you in picking the right size, the right site.
Yeah, thank you about that. I once lived in a house where the sun was facing the sitting room and the bedroom in the evenings. So between 3 and 6 p.m., it was so hard to stay in the house, and yet it is an apartment. Where do you stay? So I didn't realize how important that was until I lived there. And I believe it's important that we all get to visit the sites. I think sometimes when we make investments, we do them by proxy, or we hear there's a piece of land somewhere and we don't even visit the place. I would encourage you to actually go visit the place, use a professional. That could save you a lot of money later on. So we are not experts in property. We are not experts in building and construction. Then we really need to use those who can help us with such things. So we've looked at the budget, we've looked at the sites. Before we go to the team of experts, I would want to talk about design. What I have noted with many people, maybe not so many people, but I've had conversations with people who own their homes, both here and especially in rural areas. Many people tend to always be uncomfortable with their property. They designed their properties, they put up their properties. And some of the things you'll hear is the rooms are too small or the rooms are too big. There's one who was saying the roof is too low. So what normally should be the rule of thumb when it comes to design? Because when you listen to those conversations, what you tend to hear is as if people are saying, they don't have the money, so let's reduce or do something about the design. But what should we know about these designs ultimately as we make decisions?
Yeah, on design, definitely it's largely still driven by the requirements of the client. But as a consultant, as an architect, what I would advise people is always target to have sizable and usable common areas. These common areas will be your living areas, will be your kitchens, or perhaps be the family rooms. So those you have to really get a size that you're happy with, that is usable, that is livable, that you feel comfortable, not too big, not too small, because what we've seen is sometimes people go and build such large bedrooms that you're actually sacrificing the size of the kitchen, size of the living rooms and such. Whereas you realize the time you're spending in the bedroom is actually very, very short. Many times you're just going to sleep, wake up, and you out. But the times you spend in these common areas, it's significant, a lot more than you actually spending in the bedroom. So if you have to really, if on the balance of things, looking at a certain budget that you have, and you need to provide some spaces in some areas, you need to actually target slightly larger living rooms and such. The other thing is we always target a much open design, kill corridors as much as possible. Corridors just waste space, they are unlivable, they are cold. So have the architect design in spaces that mesh into each other and largely open, because it's very easy to actually make a space look larger. If you can imagine, you have a kitchen that is opening, say, into the dining, opening into the living room, one or another, it makes that space feel much, much larger. Then you probably have, say, a family room that opens into this slightly well-sized lobbies and all that now makes the whole living experience really different. So it's a matter of design, and design influences a lot how you feel within your space. You should go for higher ceilings. Many times we've just done a house where we've put in one ceiling at 7.5 meters high, the living room ceiling. So those are 2.5 typical floors. And if you get into that space currently, you actually feel this huge volume, and there is a feeling that it actually gives you. So have higher ceilings. My advice is to start at around 3 meters. 3 to 3.3 meters is a good enough ceiling, especially because the higher you go also, it means that you're probably paying more because the engineers have to support those walls. You're probably going to 15, 17 courses of stone, which need some structural support. And that structural support, when it comes in, it starts becoming expensive. But at 3 meters, 3.3 meters, it's a good height of a ceiling, and it makes the space feel warm. The claustrophobia, that feeling of claustrophobia disappears. Then go for big windows. And windows, don't go for less than 30%. The ratio of windows to the walls that you have in any room, target at minimum of 30%. And that light also increases the volume of space, increases, it just creates that psychological feel that actually the space is large. Yeah.
Right, that's great. I think when you were recording the other conversation, one of the things you mentioned is how you design houses as architects also need to be informed on the stage of life that you are in. And I think you've alluded to that. The younger families will tend to need more living space. The kids just go to bed to sleep and get out. But remember, for those who are in the other webinar, we were talking about aging in place. If you intend to age and live in your home, you'll probably need a larger bedroom than you needed when you are younger, because you are likely to spend a little bit more time. So again, I just want to encourage people to use professionals when you're making these decisions, because a home is something that hopefully you're going to live in until end of life. So if you're not comfortable, you'll be uncomfortable in your own home for a very, very long time. So please use professionals, listen to their advice. If it doesn't make sense, sleep over it, get to understand why they're making those recommendations, air your concerns, and then they will be able to design a home that will fit your lifestyle. So on a lighter note, one of the things I have noticed in the new homes that are being developed, I'm a fan of visiting homes that are being developed. I visited one on 1st of June, and I just saw this home that looks like, I mean, it's the sitting room, the dining room, the kitchen is just one big space. And I was just wondering, what happens in those kitchens? Does the real work, as I know what I do in my kitchen, really happen here? Or what other things are people doing to make sure that they have this beautiful kitchen, but the home is still livable? Maybe from an architect's perspective, you can let me know.
Okay, so we will realize that the phenomenon of really open plan kitchens, which open into dinings, into the living rooms, it's an American style that has now carried over to the rest of the world. However, what I've seen in this market is that people go for those open plan kitchens, but somewhere along there you find them starting to shut them, to close some sections, because either they are visitors and they are cooking, and there is that interaction. They don't want, you don't want the smells or the sense from food getting or flowing through to the living room. So we find people start closing some of those spaces. Now, two interventions that you see and you see in this market is that people are either doing what they're calling a dirty kitchen, and then they have this finishing kitchen, which is just a showpiece, really. That all you do is probably warm food and all that, but it's fully kitted. But the actual work is happening in a dirty kitchen. And this dirty kitchen many times is not so big. It just accommodates, it might accommodate a fridge or freezer, a cooker, and a sink. So it's slightly smaller than the showpiece kitchen, but it's an intervention to deal with these issues, practical issues, especially in our culture, that come about in this open plan kitchen. The other one that it's something that I've done before is to have a kitchen that opens into the dining space, but it's not opening into the living areas or into the living room, into the lounge. And you can have your architect actually design it that way, such that yes, the dining will be open into the living areas, but the kitchen is not open into that. Again, it's an intervention just to deal with this, so that you still have one space and seamless, but then you don't have to deal with some of these very practical issues that come with cooking and you have visitors and all that happening within that big space.
Okay, great. So it's important to know the lifestyle that you want to live and ensure that the design is enabling you to actually live well that lifestyle. So as we move towards winding up, I think many people who do constructions or who are considering constructing, one of the things they are really concerned about is the team of experts that they have to work with. You have to deal with an architect, a builder, a surveyor, engineers, depending on the kind of house that you're doing. And I think for most people, or when I listen to people, that's where their greatest concern seems to come from. Now, we are not professionals, and I think one of the things that I hear people saying is that I know they will steal from me. Whether you are there or not, they still steal from you. How can we best manage these experts? Is there a solution to a layman who will be told to do something that is not necessary, or the materials will be stolen? What exactly can we do?
Okay, now let me put it this way. I think sometimes it comes back to integrity of the team that you bring on board. So number one, it's definitely integrity, and getting to work with somebody who's delivered elsewhere and who can be referred or as references. That is very, very key. However, you will realize unless there's a collusion between the team, the consultants team, with the contractor, if there is that collusion, then as a client, you can actually get it, because especially in this way, in what we call variations, when you are told, so this needs to be done, or this needed to be done, and it is costing this much, and it's a variation that you were not aware of, or the consultants actually did not make you aware of. And that's why we say variations is actually one of the areas that you need to look at, even when you're working within a contractor, even your own variations as a client, because when they come in, many times when they are priced slightly differently from the way we would have priced the contract initially. But so the other key thing that you need to look at is really by bringing these contractors, and I always advise clients, if I have done a design for you, I might propose names of contractors that you might look at, but also bring in contractors that you feel comfortable with. Let them also give you a quotation. Then the work of the architect becomes very easy, because once we have agreed on that top budget, when we have agreed this house is costing you 10 million, the work you give your consultants is actually to manage so that it's delivered within that budget, or if possible, save. For actually big contracts, these big multi-billion shilling projects, what we've seen clients doing is telling the consultants team, for any savings that you make, you will probably get to keep 20 or even 30% of those savings. And the consultants actually work overtime to ensure that they are savings. Now, it might not be possible for smaller projects, but it is always good that you work to the budget. So if it's 10 million, if it's my team as a consultant who give you 10 million as a budget, let's work with that. Unless there are things that come, like now, material prices have gone up, and it was unexpected. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, we've seen steel doubling. That's really what we call an act of God. It was unexpected, and it has affected a lot of developers. But it is always good, get your consultant to work to that definite, that budget that you have. The other thing, I always tell people, always have somebody also you can trust on site, because the consultants will not be on site every full time, but your love food is there. Get somebody else that you can trust to be on that site, if possible, full time. That also saves you significant amount of cash from really small things being taken from site, which then add up to hundreds of thousands, even to millions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the project you took me to, the one we visited, one of the people you mentioned is that he's a full-time employee. The owner of the property has employed him to supervise. So is it okay to have one professional non-traditional, supervise others? And if it is, who would be best placed to do that?
Traditionally, the architect actually has been the consultant, the overall in charge of the other consultants. So he reports to the client. So we'll find even on-site meetings, his architect will take charge of the site itself and really be the one responsible to the client for all aspects of the project. And when I talk about all aspects, is really everything, because the client, unless the client has taken an item out of the scope, the consultants needs to actually take everything and everything on behalf of the client. So the architect will do that. On larger projects, we'll probably find a project manager who now comes in and takes charge, and that project manager could be any of these consultants. It could be an engineer, an architect, or a QS, but then they come in and now they're overall really in charge.
Right. So this conversation cannot end. I know we can do this for the whole day, and maybe just wind up this particular conversation. I believe we'll have opportunities to talk about this some more. There's the whole issue of non-traditional construction. So in Kenya, we use stones from Darugo and elsewhere. I mean, why don't we have other non-traditional construction like we find in developed countries? Is it an alternative that somebody can explore?
Okay, very good question. This sort of question of alternative materials has actually been with us for the longest. But you probably not know, but it's only in Kenya, in Africa, it's only in Kenya, Algeria, and Morocco that you actually get this natural stone that we use here, the Darugo stone. And not all parts of Kenya. If you go to Western Kenya, definitely you don't get that stone. But parts of Eastern Kenya, you get this natural stone. Now, I'll probably tell you all factors held constant in this market. Natural stone is still the cheapest mode of construction or material of construction for walls and such. We've experimented with EPS. EPS is this expanded polystyrene sheets that you see people are using. They, on a square meter basis, they will cost you more than natural stone. So we've experimented with stabilized soil blocks. Stabilized soil blocks will actually save you money, but not many people want to build those. They think they're using soil to build, so they don't want to use that. Concrete would be cheaper, especially if the walls are thinner. If you are talking about 15 centimeter walls and smaller, concrete will be cheaper than natural stone. However, the challenge with concrete is that you need to build the formwork where you pour in that concrete, and it has to be done. Some of it you probably use and you might not reuse. If you are using aluminum sheets, for example, or panels for that, they are a lot more expensive. So buying that formwork for one house, it tends to become more expensive. What I'm seeing, the interventions is that a few people now are getting into that space for rent, and ultimately then you'll start finding a lot of concrete homes being built, especially if you can rent that formwork. The other materials that you can use in this market, bricks. Bricks are not cheaper than natural stone on a square meter basis. So because of just the processing that they have to go through. So in this market, especially where we've been blessed with natural stone, for sure, natural stone will still on a square meter basis be cheaper. Okay. Don't even talk about containers, because I know that is something else that we can talk about. But it's, yeah, containers can be twice as expensive. Okay. Yeah.
Great. I just want to thank you very, very much for all those insights and that free knowledge that you're sharing with us. So I would want us to take some questions. I hope we'll be able to address all of them. I'll start with Evans Mahero. He's asking, what is the soil type in Gekambura?
Gekambura has a mix, because that's the lower zones as we're getting towards Mau, and a lot of the Mau areas, you still have a lot of volcanic ashes and all that. So you'll have a lot of maram in some areas, but you also have red soils. So it's a mix of those. Either of those two soils, I'm not too scared to actually build on them. When I see maram, I know for sure within 1 meter, 1.5 meters, I'll still get a good bearing level for foundations. The same for red soils.
Okay. Evans again says he visited 5-star Runda. I don't know if you're familiar with it. A 4-bedroom with a DSQ asking for 52 million. Would that house cost even 10 million to put up?
5-star Runda, those are around, give or take, 300, 320 square meters houses. If you use my rule of thumb, I know the houses, I know the developer. So quick rule of thumb, really, we're talking about anything between 15 and 18 million shillings for that top. But really, economies of scale, the developer used much less. The other thing is land. So all those units are sitting on about an eighth of an acre. And you know where they are. So Kiambu, what you've seen an acre, I think currently probably talking of Kiambu Road, you're talking about 60, 70, up to about 80 million shillings. So even if you use the top, it's about another 10 million shillings for the land that you need to add. So anything between 25 and 28 million shillings. Now, if it's at 52, the developer is making really double. That's very quick math.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Now we know how to calculate the value of property. Mary Mogo is asking, who is the most important person in the team while you do the construction? I don't know if that's what you said.
Yeah, so I would say actually that the entire team is as important. So the engineer is as important as the architect is as important as the QS. So because this team needs to work as one. So definitely I know probably this question is coming because we'll probably spend more time with the architect, with your architect, because he is the first person you visit. You talk to the architect first, and you probably spend a lot of time for the architect to actually just listen to you, to get your vision, to understand your intents and all that, and your dream, and to actually translate that into paper. You spend a lot of time, and I always say, as a client, please spend as much time as possible with the architect. Bring in your family if possible. Let your children also speak out. Say this is what they really do. Dreaming, and let the architect now take that and translate that into a design. So perhaps because of that, you might find you're probably closer to the architect more than to the other team members. Some clients actually never end up knowing, as it were, the other team members. You might find you're dealing with the architect, he's dealing with the engineers and the QS, but you know the architect. Yeah.
Right. So the architect, after all, he's the one you start with right from the beginning. And Kinuthia is asking, what is the possibility of having retirement homes here in Kenya, like those in developed countries? She feels like it's less stressful as a retirement plan.
I agree. It's actually less stressful. You get to live, you get to have a community around you that understands you. And what we've not seen is because traditionally the generation ahead of our parents, perhaps the generation which is in their 70s now, a lot of those, it will be a struggle for them to get into retirement homes. What we are seeing, the generation in their 60s, but especially in their 50s and 40s ourselves, we're more comfortable to get into this master planned retirement village and stay there. And I think that's where we are going. We've started seeing developers delving into that. We have the developer Superior Homes who've done Green Park on Mombasa Road. They have actually a development village, or rather retirement village. The pricing, I think, has been an issue, but we're starting to see the movement towards that. And as we age, especially in the next 10 years, we actually start seeing a lot of developers coming into that space.
Yes, and I think when we had the webinar on aging in place, I think we extensively discussed this. And I just want to let everyone know that I'm particularly very interested in the whole issue of retirement homes, retirement villages, co-housing, and very soon I'll be preparing a webinar, and hopefully I'll be able to get one of the experts, probably even from the US market, to just tell us how that is working there. We might also we'll try to get a Kenyan who is working in UK in a co-housing project. If she will be available, we'll be glad to host her so that we can get practical information on what exactly is happening in those retirement homes and how we can adapt them. But I would like to say that there's a lot of research going on with myself. I've been talking to Raphael. We've talked extensively about the designs of those homes. I've also started talking to a few developers, and he also knows a few developers. And hopefully very, very soon we'll be able to bring those experts together in a webinar where they will tell us why they are not doing it or how they can even do it. And so if you're interested, please stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be able to address that in the next few months. So the other question I will ask here is when doing a low-cost rural home, there is the idea to just use a contractor and ignore other consultants. What's your opinion?
It can be a recipe for disaster, for sure. At the very outset, at least have some guidance in terms of the plans. I'm doing a rural home for a client who is based in the US, in some parts of Kenya. And we got a foreman because it's not a site to visit every week. It's further. So I have to be very comfortable with the foreman that you get on board. And then you get this foreman, and he's done quite a bit of projects in Nairobi, but you will still realize there are challenges because in terms of the execution. So the client wanted a sunken lodge, and that's what we have designed. And then we had an extensive terrace outside. Now, ideally, the way we design it is that the terrace has to be lower than the lodge. Now, you can imagine what the contractor went and did is to build the terrace at the same level as the other internal areas. The slab, he put a slab such that he had a sunken lodge, which is truly sunken. If it rains from the outside, the terrace, that water will come into the lodge, and you will have a pool of water inside. And I went there and we had to repeat that particular work. And this is actually an experienced foreman. There has been challenges as well on that project, and the mechanical engineer, to literally go to site and sit there with the plumber for 4 or so hours just to show him where the points for plumbing are coming in. Because the way the plumber did is what we used to, but it was not going with the scheme that we had designed. The way we had designed, we had, and the faucets that we are going for, the WCs we're going for, it will not have worked with what the plumber had provided. So you always find you might get a foodie to do things on site, but then you get into these problems, certainly. And they will come. We'll see them on the roof. You'll see them sometimes on the structure, on the walls. You'll see them on the floors, and they will be very, very visible.
Okay. So my friends, let's make use of good professionals. They'll save you a lot of money in the end. And I think one of the other things that sometimes we don't use professionals is because we have really not planned our finances well. And we are probably squeezing this project at a time when we also have other things that we are taking care of. Maybe you have the burden of school fees amongst other things. So you're really trying to squeeze every coin. And probably at that point, you make a decision, let me handle some of these things, or let me not engage an architect at this point. So I would want to encourage you to, if you need help of a financial planner, we can work with you to help you know how can you best work on this project. Do you wait a little bit? Or do you start now? Because one of the things we tend to do is that we tend to be very pessimistic when it comes to our incomes. We see the cost of building is going high, and we just assume that if I don't do it now, it will be more expensive in future. But that is just one side of the story. Your income would also get better in future. And many of the people who are uncomfortable with their homes is because they put up those homes at a season in life when they were dealing with a lot, and they couldn't see a time when they would do better. Then a few years down the road, they are doing much, much better. They wish they could have done a better job. So sometimes it's just a matter of timing. When do you start this project? Do you delay for a few months or a few years, and you'll be able to do a good job? So if you need that help, please do. So I think I'll take the last question, which is from Wanjiko Moshiri. She's saying, again, going back to the whole story of consultants, how about consultancy fees approximations when you are building from scratch and want an idea of your entire cost with your design? Do you see an architect first, a QS, an engineer? Whom do you speak to first?
Yeah, so you likely many times, if you are close or if you are friends, say with an engineer or QS, you can always have that chat. But most times the clients will approach an architect first for that conversation. And even for the fees, the architect will actually give you, sometimes clients want to get a ballpark figure. So ballpark figure is negotiated. We've seen in some situations, really, anything, because we've done homes where the fees have ranged between maybe 100,000 for the architect to millions, and those are homes. So many times those are negotiated, but ballpark, smaller units, small houses, anything between 200, 300, you'll probably be able to actually get it. But it's traditionally we've been using percentages, and the percentages are by law provided. But you rarely in this market, especially for clients who are doing homes, we rarely find those clients going with those percentages. They want to have a feel of the ballpark figure. And so the architect will largely actually be able to give you a guidance on the ballpark figure given the house that you are going for and the estimated cost of that house. Because the larger the house, definitely the more work I will probably end up doing, and the more complicated, and the more consultants also bring on board. Because in some houses, there's a house we're doing in Runda, for example, where we have about 6 different consultants, from the engineers to the landscape architects, interior designers, automation consultant, and all that. All those come into play. And of course, they all cost money. But we end up finding, yesterday we had a meeting on site, and we had 25 different sub-consultants, because this really is designed as a smart home. It's a 21st century home to compete with the best in the world. So depending on what you are going for and the complexity, then you'll probably find also the fees that you pay will really vary.
Okay. I have understood everything except ballpark. What is ballpark?
It's a round figure, and a round figure is, you come and say, many clients want to know how much will it cost me to bring consultants on board. And looking at the project, I probably say maybe 300,000 or 500,000. So that's a ballpark that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Wanjiko, the same person, is asking for contacts of those experts. I would say, please reach out to Raphael. We'll be sharing his contacts, or maybe Raphael, you can share your contacts for those who would want to reach out to you.
Yeah, I can put it on chat, even as we talk. Let me put my number on chat, and you can reach me on that number.
Okay.
Yeah. So
talk to Raphael. He's put his number in chat, and he can have a conversation with you. If you can afford him, you can work with him. If you can't afford him, then he'll probably direct you to somebody else. So I just want to thank you all once again for taking your time to attend this webinar and to learn regarding whether to build or buy. Probably many of you have come up with they have made up their mind what's the way to go. For me, I'm still considering the whole issue of retiring together with people I know, a community. I would really want that idea. And so in most cases, if those options will not be available in the market or they will not be affordable, then it means that I'll have to develop that. So I guess this is a decision you constantly think about until you actually get to implement it. I would encourage you to continue thinking about it, praying about it. This is a key decision. But if you are struggling with any aspects of managing your finances and you'd like help, and sometimes it's not just about struggling, sometimes people just need that vote of confidence, that objective confirmation that you're on the right track. At Retirement Solutions, we help people plan their retirement benefits and their retirement lifestyle. And also at Next Move Consulting, we do consulting on individuals and families where we work together to clarify where you are and clarify where you want to go, and then help you develop strategies on how you can actually achieve your desired goals. So I would encourage you, call us, let's talk, let's see if we would be able to help you. If not, we might be able to recommend you to somebody else. For those who have not bought the retirement planning book, I would say that's one of the places to start. You can start planning for your retirement. The earlier you start, the better it is. It's not just a book about retirement, it's also a book about investing for the next seasons of your life. So with that, I just want to thank you all, and I would want to invite one